Interesting fight added to our slate coming up on UFC Fight Night. Font versus Aldo. We have the UFC debut of Missouri's own Darian Weeks. Listen, this guy is an exciting prospect with tons of experience. Might not be at the pro level, but as an AMI, 15-3 IMMAF experience. The guy's traveled the world fighting in MMA, and you absolutely love to see that. I wrote down some names of some of the fighters that have had some bouts with IMMAF, but Alessio Di Chirico, Jack Shore, Manel Fiorito, just some of the many names, not even to mention, how about Makayev that's going to be making his UFC debut coming up? I mean, he was perfect as an amateur, perfect as a pro, but if you look at it for Darian Weeks, very, very interesting prospect coming into this because this is a guy that's not really taking the usual route to get to the UFC. Yes, his last fight was the LFA. It was LFA 99. He picks up a finish win. And that was a card where we had multiple fighters on that card ending up in the UFC. That one was headlined by Fabio Charant, the Water Buffalo, if you know him. But it was a very good card and a very good win for Weeks, who definitely has developed a much better striking repertoire. It seems like fight over fight, the guy continues to impress. I've got a lot of notes about Darian Weeks, but you already know who Bryan Barberena is. I mean, you look at his record. Is it a little salty at 15-8? Yeah, it is. Is it 6-6 in the UFC? Yeah, it is. Is he kill or be killed? For the most part, he is. Does he have 3 fight of the night bonuses? Yes, he does. Are they all in losses?
There's a lot of questions that you're kind of asking right now.
Yeah, they are. So for Barberena, a very highly technical fighter, but also a brawler. Like, that's the thing. We know a lot about Bryan Barberena. The sample size is there with 12 UFC fights, but out of those 3 fight of the nights, none of them wins, and I'm really surprised because I went back through, and when I'm writing all of this stuff down, I'm thinking, geez, he got kind of mopped in his last fight, didn't he? It ended up a fight of the night. He got taken down 8 times by Jason Witt, and it was one of those ones where when it was standing, Witt's a wrestler. He's not much of a striker. You can go back and look at the fights that he's had so far in the UFC if you want proof. But Barberena, he's had so many injuries. He's had almost like life-threatening, career-worrying bouts in the last couple of years where you were, and I say bouts, but bouts with injury and hospital stays where you go, geez, I don't know if this guy's ever going to be able to continue to compete. And he comes out his last time. Obviously, he has to shake off the rust. He looked good in the striking. He looked bad in the wrestling.
He didn't look good in the striking, though, because he got dropped multiple times.
That's the thing. Like, to me,
he's not the same guy he used to be. I'm sorry to cut you off, but that has to be said.
That's it.
It's like Kemba Walker. Kemba Walker, when he played for the Charlotte Hornets, was one of the best point guards in the NBA. He was cash. He was a super good isolation scorer. Then he gets hurt, goes to the Celtics. He's still very good, but injuries start to take their toll. And then if you look at the basketball player we have today in Kemba, he got benched for the New York Knicks, and he's averaging under 10 points per game. You get the idea. Just because you were great doesn't mean you always will be great. And at a certain point, those injuries do take their toll on you. And for Barberena, it's been really interesting because he wasn't really a guy who I ever thought, okay, if he just gets 1, 2, maybe 3 more wins together, he'll be in the top 15. He's always been one of those like action fighters just outside of the rankings. And with the likes of like Nico Price, Tim Means, those type of guys.
Matt Brown that he was supposed to fight coming up this week. Now that fight was announced as canceled a week ago. Brown gets COVID. Barberena, and I'm going to throw the tweet up there from our friend over on Twitter, Alex Behunin. He threw it out there that Barberena was going to travel to Vegas regardless and hope they found him an opponent. Tuesday, they find him Darian Weeks.
Okay, here's the thing. Darian Weeks, this is really, really young in his career to be getting a fight like this against Bryan Barberena. Because like you mentioned, yes, he has all that amateur experience, and that's great because it's really weird how, like, there's no real set way to get to the UFC. Like, in baseball, I know how a guy can get to the major leagues. Just make your way all the way through all the developmental leagues, be somewhat unique, and you'll make it there eventually. In MMA, some guys have no amateur fights, some people have 20, some people take Muay Thai fights, then come into MMA. Like, there's not really a set path to get into the UFC, and for Weeks, this is an odd one. He has a lot of experience against lower levels of competition, and now they're just kind of throwing him in against the wolves with Bryan Barberena, and yes, Barberena's not the same guy he used to be, but in your 6th professional fight on short notice, it is a tough ask to go in there and try to fight Bryan Barberena.
So I went back through and I watched every Darian Weeks pro fight, and I watched a little bit of the AMI stuff. This is what I had out of it. So again, I mentioned the guy's from Missouri. I want to make sure that I get it right. It's Sedalia, Missouri. So that's where he's from. He trains out of, and we got to give shouts where it's due, the Hewlett House of MMA in Columbia. And listen, they said the Body Shop in a couple of his last fights, but when I went back and I watched him fight, Very, very good boxing. In all 5 of his pro fights, his opponents try and engage in the wrestling. Usually, he wins out. His second to last fight, he didn't until he ends up getting on top, finishing the fight, because his opponent slowed down a little bit, went for a sloppy single. That's the thing. Great at defending single leg takedowns, great at defending up against the cage. I have seen him pressured, and again, that second to last fight, the majority of the first round against Dustin Parrish is spent with Parrish on top in full guard, and it is the worst video. If you go out and find it, it's on YouTube.
There's like
it's a cell phone video. It's terrible. LFA 99 is great. Everything else you got to find on Facebook. You got to find on YouTube. It's there. It's just not the greatest. But when I went back and watched it, he fights Craig Fairley his last fight, who's 3-4. Okay, not good, but you got to get wins over guys like that. All of Craig Fairley's wins were against opponents who were 5-23, 3-3, and 4-6. All 5 of his losses, including the loss to Weeks, are by finish. So not the greatest of opponent.
Call Jay Ellis up.
Fairley goes for a bunch of leg locks. All right, doesn't get it. Gets kneed in the clinch. Gets back up. Gets kneed a couple more times. He gets finished. Then we go to the fight against Parrish. Bunch of leg locks by Parrish in that fight. Everybody seems to think I can wrestle Weeks and I can go for leg locks. Nobody gets them. His last 3 fights, it was like the Danaher Death Squad was coming out to fight Weeks in 2020 and 2021. Then I go back to the fight against Richards. So his third to last fight, that's against Blaine Richards. In that one, Richards tried to grapple with him, doesn't work. At the end of it, Weeks ends up getting the back, submits him, and so on and so forth. Out of all of the pros I can say for Weeks, the level of competition as a pro, not quite there. Amateur, it was actually against some good guys. But as a pro, it hasn't been the greatest.
Amateur also has weird rule sets too, so that's why amateur records are always really spotty and you can't put a lot into them.
But he's got it. You can tell he's a polished fighter as a pro. And I think a fight against Barberena, a little bit early, but I want to throw out there what I like out of Weeks because we got to give this guy his shine. I feel like a lot of people are going to overlook him. They're going to have that hindsight is 2020. Bryan Barberena comes to bang. His nickname's Bam Bam. Julian Lane would approve. But for Weeks, really good leg kick, good head movement offensively, really, really crisp striking. And his boxing, very, very good. I'd say that's his best part of his skill set. He told the LFA broadcast crew it was his wrestling. That's neither here nor there. But I really do like his striking, and it's come along as his fights have progressed.
It has, but I still find his striking quite modular. He's either in sort of a boxing mode and then in his kicking mode. He doesn't really mix the two together all that well, and that's a big problem I have with his overall style.
His hands, nice placement, but when he backs up, they come out like this. It's weird.
That's what I was going to say.
Go ahead.
I mean, you kind of stole my thunder.
All right, well, I apologize. Matt, we look at the odds for this one. Bryan Barberena open to minus 170. And again, there's very few sites that have odds on this one. He's a minus 193 favorite right now. For Weeks, he opened a plus 150. He's a plus 162. We threw this over, Matt, to the voters in the YouTube community tab. If you're not checking it out, it's always updated. Let's hear from the fans on this one, Matt. 581 total votes, 57% Barberena, 43% Darian Weeks. We compare that to Tapology. About the same, 335 total votes, 66% Barberena, 34% Weeks. Those Weeks voters, though, 70% have him to win by knockout. I think he's got a great opportunity in this fight against a fighter who's on the decline. I mean, the guy's 1-3 in his last 4. You look at the level of competition, though. Vicente Luque, Randy Brown, the win over Anthony Ivy, yikes, and Jason Witt. It's gone down. He's had injuries. He's older. Weeks is on the come up. He's undefeated. The one thing I want to say, Matt, about Weeks before I hand it off to you, he was supposed to fight on week 2 of Contender Series this past summer in a main event. He was supposed to take on a guy that was well enough known in Josh Quinlan. So Weeks gets COVID. He's out of the fight. Quinlan ends up fighting Logan Urban, wins by round 1 TKO. That fight overturned to a no contest. Why? Because Quinlan tests positive for drostanolone. So maybe a good thing that Weeks held out. He gets a fight in the actual UFC against a guy that wasn't on PEDs. Now we're here.
Bryan Barberena should win this fight, but I have a weird feeling he's going to lose the same way Terrence McKinney beat Matt Frivola. If Bryan Barberena loses this fight, it's because he's going to walk directly into a power shot 30 seconds into it. Now, it's very hard for me to predict that Darian Weeks is going to go out there and knock out Bryan Barberena in the first round 30 seconds in, so the official pick is going to be Bryan Barberena, but I've never been less confident in an unranked welterweight prediction because This is not the same Bryan Barberena who could go in there, eat a shot to give a shot, and just have these fun wars. Like, yes, he can eat a couple punches now, but at a certain point, like, your durability does just go out the window. And now, Barberena can't eat shots to the body. We saw that against Randy Brown. Randy Brown hit him with a body kick that really hurt him. And now when he gets hit in the chin, I start to worry too. It's one thing to be knocked out by Vicente Luque. Luque could knock out anybody in this division. But when Jason Witt is lighting your ass up like a Christmas tree, that's when I do start to get concerned. So, the official prediction will be Bryan Barberena because I do like his overall output, and especially against someone who is so green in the UFC. If this was let's say Miguel Baeza, for instance. I know he's not on the best stretch of his career right now, but still a very technical guy who can stay on the outside. Then I'd be a lot more confident with, someone who might not get caught up into the brawl as much. But I do see Weeks going in there, trying to do that, I'll hit you once to eat a shot. And there's the type of fights that Bryan Barberena tends to win.
Barberena with output in the positive, though lately it hasn't been all that great. And I mean, realistically, he was supposed to be taking on Matt Brown, a guy that's going to give one to take one, that's going to strike somewhat similarly to Darian.
And he has good volume too for an old guy, so I do think Barberena is going to be in good shape to go 3 rounds.
Matt Brown's game is similar to Weeks, and depending on who you had to win between Brown and Barberena, hopefully one day we actually get that fight, elbows notwithstanding. But in a fight like this, you have the 103rd ranked U.S. welterweight on Tapology taking on the 60th ranked worldwide welterweight in Barberena. None of that stuff matters. The pick for me is Barberena as well. I like his output more than I like Weeks' on the feet, but Weeks has power, man. And you look at the way he's able to string his combinations together from his first pro fight to his last pro fight, albeit against guys 3-4, now 3-5, and all 5 of his losses by finish. Take that for what it's worth. If you like Darian Weeks, like I do, you let him know, let us know down below in the comments section. But my pick here, Barberena, Matt in agreement with me here as well. You let us know what you like, what you didn't like. Hit up that comment section, toss a like, toss a sub, as they always say. And make sure you check out Question Mark Kicks. It's 2 hours before the prelims on Saturday. We have a loaded 15-fight card coming up this weekend. And then another 15 fights next weekend, UFC 269. You're not going to want to miss it, so keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.